There are two types of people in this world. There are those that think that compromise is a good thing, and there are those that think that compromise is a dirty word. In this room right now, more than likely, every one of you leans to one side of that spectrum. And it's interesting because the same word can mean drastically different things to two different people. For some of you, the word compromise that we're going to talk about this morning is actually a good word. It's a beautiful thing. Compromise is the only reasonable thing, the only logical solution to two parties that are far apart. Compromise is the obvious answer to most of the problems in the world that we have. Compromise is where we should aim the prow of our ships. And for you, this is an admirable and a noteworthy goal. And yet there are others of you in this room right now where the word compromise itself is a dirty word. Compromise is a sign and a symbol of weakness. The word just drips with some sort of backing down, hiding from, squirreling away when the fight is happening in front of you, and compromise is wholly and completely a negative thing. And so you have people who love the word and hate it, who are drawn to it and repelled from it, and in my experience, those two people marry each other. Because Mel and I have been married for 21 wonderful years together. Truthfully amazing that I wouldn't trade for the world. And one of the reasons why is we had to learn how to do this thing called compromise. And so those of you who are married, hands up if you have ever compromised about anything before. See, in our lives, I find compromise happens in a whole bunch of areas. One of those areas I'm going to call piles. My wife and I have decided to compromise about piles. You see, our lives are busy. 3 kids, school, church, ministry, all the things that go along with caring for a house. And what we find is at the end of a day, not everything that you take out is there time to fold and put back. Can I get an amen? There just isn't space to organize everything, and so my wife has adopted what I call the pile philosophy. And so throughout our house are these little piles of things and collections of items, and I don't even know what's in them half of the time, but these piles start to pop up all over the house. And for my wife, it's the only logical way to deal with the problem because there's no time to put everything away. And I am told that there is a system to these piles. And if I so much as touch them, I will ruin everything, and so I don't. And yet for me, if I'm being honest with you, piles make my skin crawl. They speak to me in the night. I can hear them whispering and taunting me. I'm the kind of person that I think in clean spaces. I like clean lines. Negative space is necessary for me to breathe normally. And a corner for me is meant to be looked at, not filled with things. Anybody else? All right, so we just divided the room in half. And so we used to get into the same, I don't want to call it a fight, but it kind of was. Every night, the tension would build for me, and right before bed, I would tell her, we got to get rid of all these piles. And so that's exactly what your wife wants to hear before she falls asleep, is the list of things that she didn't get done that day and all the work that she was supposed to do. And so we would get into these squabbles all of the time. And so we had to learn how to compromise. Now, in order to compromise, my end of the deal was I wouldn't say anything about the piles before bed, and every 3 weeks or so, she would compromise by putting these things away. Sometimes I just want to go around with a garbage bag and fill it and take it outside, but this was our compromise, and it works for us. She and I learned how to compromise about the number of pets that we have in the house. If it were up to my wife, we would have a petting zoo at our property. If we ever win the lottery, we will have a hobby farm with every animal you can imagine. And that will be difficult because we don't play the lottery, but I'll let her dream. And we will have every animal under the sun that you could imagine. And the compromise was she wanted 3 pets. I said 2 and no more. And we compromised by getting 3 pets. You understand, don't you? And some of you mathematicians in the room are saying, well, hey, PC, that's not compromise. And I assure you that it is, because 3 was not her number. That was her opening bid. And so I will gladly take 3 because I know how much worse it can get. You see, when you ask this question, is compromise a good thing or a bad thing? There is no easy answer to it, because the true answer to that question is simply this: it depends, doesn't it? Whether or not compromise is a good thing depends entirely upon the situation and the details and the circumstances. And so when it comes to piles, you should compromise. When it comes to the vows that you spoke on your wedding day, you should not. Isn't that right? See, compromise can be both a good thing and a bad thing, entirely dependent on the circumstances that it's in. When it comes to relationships and preferences, compromise is the answer. When it comes to faithfulness and fidelity and monogamy and the vows that you made, compromise is a dangerous thing. And so we need to be really clear what we mean by the word compromise if we're going to discuss it properly. Because today we are going to talk about compromise. We're going to talk about a church 2,000 years ago that was being pressured, was being tempted towards this thing called compromise, and we're going to try and understand why they struggled. Because the truth is, the struggle they had is the struggle we have today. The church is under the same kind of attack now as it was then, and if we are wise, we will learn from them, because God has something to say to us today about what to do when the world wants you to compromise. So let's read together Revelation chapter 2, verses 12 to 17, and see what Jesus has to say. John writes this: "To the angel of the church in Pergamum write, these are the words of him who has the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. Yet you remain true to my name. You did not renounce your faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city where Satan lives. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. There are some among you who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin, so they ate food sacrificed to idols and committed sexual immorality. Likewise, you also have those who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Repent, therefore, Jesus says, otherwise I will soon come to you and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give to that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it." This is the word of the Lord. So this church that Jesus is writing to is called Pergamum. And Pergamum was this really fancy city back in ancient Asia and the ancient Near East. And Pergamum was basically the leading city in the entire area for a number of things. For one, it was just a rich and wealthy and powerful city. It was built on a hill, an absolutely gorgeous 1,000-foot rise that they built this city on top of that looked out over the valley. And you can just see this picture here, the amphitheater carved right in the side of the mountain. And this was the city that the church of Pergamum was in. And when Jesus writes to them, the word Pergamum means citadel or fortress. And when Jesus writes to them, he says nothing about their amphitheater, nothing about the view, nothing about their power or prestige. The only thing that Jesus says about the city is what? I know where you live, the place that Satan has his throne. That's a powerful phrase. I know where you live, nothing to do with their might or prestige. I know where you live, the place where Satan has his throne. But let me ask you this morning, when I say the throne of Satan, where do you usually imagine that is? Yeah. When you think of Satan sitting on his throne, ruling over his minions and planning out his plans, the image that comes to mind is the depths of hell. At the very least, the image that comes to mind in North America is Las Vegas. Sin City. We don't call it that for no reason. So you imagine Jesus describing the place where Satan has his throne, and he says, yeah, it's in the city you live called Pergamum. And for many of us, we go, why? Why would Jesus use such strong language for this city? And here is the answer. It's building on this theme that we've been learning over these last few weeks as we look ahead to the end and the beginning. And the answer is simply this, is that Pergamum was the city that initiated this thing called the emperor cult. Pergamum was the place where worshiping the emperor Caesar himself began, and they had a temple inside the city walls that had a statue of Emperor Domitian lording over the temple, and this was where you came to worship each and every week and then go on to worship your lesser gods. The first Christian martyr means Christian who was killed for his faith, other than Stephen in the book of Acts, came from this city called Pergamum. His name was Antipas, and he was murdered because he refused to worship Caesar as God and only Jesus as Lord. And so when Jesus describes this city, this is his centralized description. He says, I know where you live. I know the pressure that you've been under. I know how difficult it has been to remain faithful to me, and I commend you for it, because even under persecution, you have held on to the truth and held on to my son Jesus, and I commend you for it. There's no question that Jesus is singing their praises as they begin. But then the letter shifts on one single word that we've been learning about. What word is that, church? Nevertheless, you all failed. Nevertheless, I hold this against you. And he goes on to list two critiques of the church in Pergamum. First, he says, you listen to the teaching of Balaam. And second, he says, people in your church hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. So you have two examples that he uses, Balaam and Nicolaitans. And when you dig back to find out who Balaam was in the Old Testament, and you start to uncover who this sect called the Nicolaitans was, here's what you find out. That the thing that the church in Pergamum was struggling with more than anything was compromise. Both of those illustrations are illustrations of compromise. If you go back and read through the story of Balaam in the Old Testament, you find out that he seduced the nation of Israel. But he didn't do it by some military campaign. He did it by getting the men to marry women of other religions and slowly but surely ensnaring them in the food and feasts where idols were sacrificed to, and sexual immorality would always follow. This is what the Bible means when it talks about idol feasts. It wasn't just dinner at a restaurant. This was a ritual in which they worshiped with their mouths and with their bodies a foreign god. And Balaam seduced the entire nation of Israel, not by the front door, but through the side door, through the marriages that they entered into. And the sect of the Nicolaitans was no different. The details changed, but the story is the same. They were a sect at the time of the church of Pergamum, and they were trying to convince the church that, listen, Rome isn't so bad. I know they're big and strong, and their army is terrifying, but really when you get down to the heart of it, Rome isn't so bad. You know what we should do? We should got to deal with them. Let's find a way of working this out. Let's find a way where we can peacefully coexist together, and they'll leave us alone and we'll leave them alone. Listen, church, it's not as hard as you think. You're making this out to be much more of a mountain. It's really just a molehill. Let's find a way to make this work. So inside of that temptation was the invitation for the church to do this thing called compromise. And both of those descriptions are exactly what Jesus is after in this story. And I'm going to say it again because I'm not talking about piles in your marriage. That's not the type of compromise that Jesus is after here. I am talking about compromising on the vows and the fidelity and the monogamy and the commitment that you made to live your life with this one and no other. That's the type of compromise that the church was being invited to. And this is the type of compromise that Jesus says, watch out. Because all around you, culture will pressure you. People will smooth talk you. They will invite you into finding a way to come up with an agreement with the society around you so that the pressure will ease and you can go about doing the things that you want to do. And Jesus calls them on the carpet. Jesus writes them this letter and he says, listen, I know where you are faithful, but I'm calling you out on this. And if you don't change, I will fight against you with the sword that comes out of my mouth, which means the truth, the living truth of the living words of God. And that's the challenge that he makes to the church in Pergamum. And what I've noticed as I have dug deep into the book of Revelation and as we learn about how things might go in the future and what will happen and what will be required of the church, here is what I have come to realize, is that Satan will attack the church primarily in two ways in the book of Revelation. There are two tactics that he will use, and here is what they are: fear and compromise. Say that with me. Fear and compromise. The two primary ways in the churches thus far, and it will continue, that he tries to get the church off track and away from the hands and protection of Jesus is through fear or through compromise. And if we want to assign an image to each of those, I would say this: he will attack you like a lion, or he will lie to you like a snake. He will intimidate you, or he will undercut you. And primarily the way that he wages war against the church in the book of Revelation is through these two things: like a roaring lion or a slippery snake whispering his way into your life. And I want to prepare you today to stand against both of those. Why don't you just put the image of the lion up for a minute? How many of you have ever spent any time close to a lion before? You ever been to the zoo? You ever been to African lion safari and had them crawl and kind of wander around your car and the baboons rip your wiper blades off the front? You ever been there? Not too long ago, I was at the zoo over in Morpeth, and when we were at Greenview, there was a cage full of two lions. The male lion slept like a lazy bum, but the female lion was alert and prowling around inside of the cage. And when I got within 4 feet of the cage, she looked me in the eye and she just stared at me. And she followed me, and I moved a little bit to the left, and she followed me to the left. And I moved a little bit to the right, and she followed me to the right. And then I decided that maybe we were playing a little game. And so I ran as fast as I could to one side, and she tracked with me all the way along. And then I ran as fast as I could to the other side, and she followed me. And after I had run as fast as I could, left and right, and turned around, I realized that she was toying with me. And if there was no fence between us, she would catch me in 3 strides flat. And she would eat me from head to toe. And I will just tell you that that experience didn't leave me for weeks afterwards, because I kept seeing her eyes following me inside the cage. And 1 Peter tells us that the devil prowls around like a what? A roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And our job is to stand firm and resist the devil, and he will flee from you. But he will chase you and intimidate you and scare you and try and get you to fall apart or to turn the wrong way just by the fear that he instills inside your heart. And our job as followers of Jesus is not to succumb to the pressure, not to be chased away by the fear, but to stand our ground, because the enemy will resist and flee from us. I don't know if you know how lions hunt, but there's a really interesting anecdote from the African plains. When a lion is older, much older than this lion here, and when he becomes old and wizened and toothless, when he has no more fight left in him or no more ability to chase down prey, what he does is he sits on the African savanna and he roars as loud as he can to strike fear into the hearts of the gazelles nearby. And what do they do when they hear that roar? They run in the opposite direction. Except lying in wait in the grass on the other side are all the female lionesses waiting claw and tooth for the gazelles. Do you understand that the gazelle, if they would have just stood their ground, they would have been safe? But because they were intimidated and they ran in the opposite direction, they ran right into the trap that the enemy had laid for them. And I think it's a powerful image for us as a church, because when you let Satan intimidate you and you run in the other direction, you will hurt yourself far more than he ever could, because you are allowing fear to dictate your next steps, not faith. It's a brilliant example because the original lion that is roaring, that you can hear for 5 miles on the African savanna, he is old and toothless and weak and useless, and he can't do anything to you, and yet he can make you run to your own demise. The enemy is a defeated foe, amen? Jesus has triumphed over him by the cross. He has disarmed him, and all the powers beneath him. None can stand against the power of Jesus, and none will stand in the long term when Jesus returns. So why do we run from the one who can't hurt us instead of trusting the one who can save us? This is the tactic all through the book of Revelation, is the tactic of fear and intimidation. And in the end times, in the last days, Satan will try and scare you and I and this church into doing something that will harm us when really we should have just stood our ground. Stand firm then and resist the devil, and he will flee from you. In the end, the enemy will try and scare you into sin. See, the lion isn't the only tactic he will use, because in the church of Pergamum, primarily here, it wasn't the lion, it was the snake. Why don't you show the other slide there? Some of you are going to have nightmares today. This is a real picture from the country or the province that I am from. It feels like a country far away sometimes, but I'm from Manitoba. And a couple hours north in Manitoba are these snake pits. True story, not an invention of Hollywood. And for whatever reason, in the spring, thousands upon 10,000s of snakes all assemble together and breed. And this is what it looks like. And if I have ever had a nightmare, it's falling into a pit something like this. And so the image that I want you to latch onto of the other danger for the church is this, is of a snake, of a compromise. See, this is what was happening in the church of Pergamum, is that the Nicolaitans and those who are within the city, they were advocating for something much like this. They were saying, listen, guys, what does it really matter what Rome is asking of us? You got to remember what was the issue. I talked about this a few weeks ago, and I just want you to see how simple this is. All you had to do when you worshiped back then, all you had to do to placate the emperor, all you had to do to be able to work Monday through Friday and support your family was walk into a temple, drop a little bit of incense on top of the fire, say a short little prayer that would rise to heaven like a flamed incense prayer, and say 3 words. Do you remember what they were? Caesar is Lord. This is all that they asked of the church to do, to walk in the room and say those 3 words. There was a statue of Domitian looking over as your prayer was ascending to him, and what the Nicolaitans were saying to the church was simply this: listen, church, what's the big deal? Why don't we just grab a little bit of this incense and drop it in the fire? Why don't we just say the 3 words that they are asking us to say? Why are we making such a big deal of this? Because we can just do what they ask and then go do what we want to. This was the temptation of the church. And so they would come, this sect called the Nicolaitans, and try and convince them that all we have to do is do what they want, and then we can do what we want. We can worship Caesar and then go to church and worship Jesus. And so the temptation was regularly there right in front of them. And the funny thing about a snake is, like the serpent in the book of Genesis, the longer you listen, the more persuasive they sound. Amen? The longer you listen to a snake, the less crazy what they're saying seems, because there is this spell that gets woven and spoken, and the more time you spend talking to a snake, the more in danger you are of falling into their trap. And this was the invitation. And I want you just to imagine that our entire church ceased to exist because we wouldn't just put a little incense on the fire and say those 3 words. I want you to imagine that every one of you lost your jobs because we just wouldn't put a little bit of incense on the fire and say those 3 words. Is it really worth it not to say 3 little words and let the prayer rise up to a different God so that we can go off to church and feed our families? Is it worth it, church? That's the question. That's the question. And this was what they struggled with. And Jesus says, sadly, many of you have fallen into the trap that the enemy has laid. You know what I've realized is the word just is one of the most powerful words in the English language. If somebody says to you, just go ahead and do that, they can make something big seem like something small. Amen? When your wife says, just clean the whole house, it's not as simple as she promises. Right? When I say to her, just put the piles away, I take something big and I make it seem little. And many times this church and many of us as Christians in the last days are going to be told this: why don't you just do that? It's not a big deal. And yet Jesus says when it comes to faithfulness and worship, it absolutely is. And we need to remain true to the one true God. Otherwise, he will write a letter to us, just like he wrote a letter to the church of Pergamum. Now, some of you might be sitting here thinking, okay, I hear you, PC. I hear you that the lion will try and scare us and intimidate us into sin, and the snake will try and compromise what makes the church holy and true and faithful to Jesus. I hear you. But to be honest with you, that sounds so far away from the world that I live in. Because last time I checked, Dresden doesn't have a temple to any other gods that we're supposed to walk into. Does anybody know about a temple in Dresden? Right, Chatham doesn't have a temple that we're required to go to in order for us to work a job and file our tax returns. And so much of what they were struggling with seems far away from what we are dealing with today. And I want to put forward to you that it's not near as far as you think. And that temptation and that world is much closer right now. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, there is no statue of Mark Carney that I have to walk into a room, pinch a little incense in and say, Carney is Lord. Does anybody have to do that? No, I've never done that, and I wouldn't. And I mean, obviously, the church is not under the pressure of the state, right? He's not asking us to worship him. Or is he? Is he? See, that's the question that many of you have started to think about, but never actually thought through. And the more I have thought about it, the more I have realized that the answer I used to have is not the answer I have anymore. And I am far more nervous than I ever was about the reality of the societal pressure that is all around us. I want to put to you this morning that compromise in our society comes in three primary places and three primary ways. And we need to check our hearts and our collective strength as a church on these three things going forward from here. They all start with the letter M: morals, methods, and muzzles. These are the things that we will be tested on in the days to come and already are tested on today. Morals, methods, and muzzles. First, let's start with morals. Our culture and our government at times will put pressure on you and I as followers of Jesus to change what we believe in order to fit into the world that we live in. Amen? I'm going to say that again because you cannot miss this. Our church and those of us as followers of Jesus will be put under pressure to change what we believe in order to fit into society as a whole. Ask any university student that has gone to a secular university in the last 10 years, and they will tell you the moment they set foot on that campus, what they were taught from the age of 2 is under pressure. They will sit in classes where professors will ridicule them and demean them and take what they believe to be holy and sacrosanct, and they will make it seem like idiocy and infantile devotion to a bunch of stories that they were taught as children. There will be pressure to change what you believe to fit into society as a whole. If you want to go to parties, you will have to change what you believe is okay because everyone else is doing it. In order for you to function in society, there is pressure to change what you believe. The pressure in our society right now is this: you are being pressured to call evil good and good evil. I don't mean tomorrow, I don't mean next week or next year, I mean right now. The church is under pressure to call evil good and good evil. Someone has broken into the jewelry store and switched the price tags on the things in our world, and somehow we have decided as a Canadian society that that which God has said is evil is actually noble, and the things that God has said is noble is ignorant. Make no mistake that this is happening right now. Your kids are feeling it more than you because they are under a different type of pressure than you are, and it is being fed to them by the phones in their hands and the professors on stage and the people hiring jobs to see what kind of lives they're living online. But make no mistake, you are under pressure to call evil good and good evil. And there is no other explanation for this than the threat and the compromise of the serpent to the church right now. Sometimes I have hesitated in the past to name some things because I have been worried that naming things ends up creating more distraction than it did before. I am also no longer convinced of this. But we live in a province where things like drag queen story hour for 5-year-olds in schools and libraries is a good thing. We are being told that anybody who disagrees with that is a bigot and full of prejudice. And I am telling you right now, that is not okay. Because we are under pressure to call that which is evil good and good evil. I'll tell you another example. As a church, We are looking to apply for a grant this summer that we might be able to employ summer students in our summer programming. And many of the VBSs around Canada utilize these summer grants to support summer students. 5 years ago, churches who had been receiving this grant for years all of a sudden noticed a new little box on that application. Do you know what the box said? I hereby declare that I support abortion and all types of sexuality, and I will not apply for this grant if I don't check this box. And so you sit there and say, well, maybe the church isn't under pressure, and I'm telling you right now, it absolutely is. Because society is pressuring the church, saying, with the shekels come the shackles. Either you say yes to this and check this box, or you don't have access to this funding. Is this the same as the Nigerian church right now who is being persecuted and being hunted on Sunday mornings? No. But are we on the continuum there? Absolutely. So you and I need to be prepared for this pressure because you will be put into that vice. And someone will say to you, why don't you just check the box? Is it really that big of a deal? Does it really matter all that much if we say we're okay with these things if we're actually not? Why don't you just check the box and then we can go about running VBS in the summer? Isn't it more important that we minister to kids than some stupid little box on a stupid little form? I'm telling you right now that the church is under pressure. I have a license from the government of Ontario. I can marry you. I can also bury you, but that's not a threat, by the way. I can marry anyone who wants to come to me, and right now I'm happy to do that. I entirely envision a world in the next 5 to 10 years where I will give up my marriage license. There will come a time at which it will not be okay for me to assign myself to the requirements of that law. It's possible God will change the world more between now and then, and I would love that. But I am telling you, I am fully prepared to relinquish my rights to marry in this province because I will not be able to comply with what is required of me. And I just want you to realize, church, that you are not looking at this through a telescope in the distance. The pressure that is on the church is already here and now, and your kids are experiencing it before you are. And I want to call you today to what Jesus called the church of Pergamum to. You cannot compromise who you worship in order to release the pressure on you. You cannot change what you believe in order to fit into society. You cannot offer up to Caesar what he requires when what he requires is that you call good evil and evil good. And there will be people in the church who will say, what's the big deal? Just do this. This is the challenge that you and I are under, and this is the invitation and the challenge that Jesus makes to the church in Pergamum. You will be in a place where you are under pressure, and you must resist that pressure instead of giving in. Second, really quickly, I want to talk to you about methods. This is the second way in which the church is under pressure to compromise, and the pressure essentially sounds a little bit like this. It is to do something good through a means that is bad. How many of you have ever heard the phrase, the ends justifies the means before? You ever heard that? I know we have to go through a tough valley to get there, but as long as we get to somewhere good in the end, it's going to be worth it in the long run. And the church is faced with this temptation nowadays. Here's what it is, to trade our allegiance for influence. Do you understand what I mean by that? If we are willing to give our allegiance to someone or some movement, even if that movement doesn't align itself with the teachings of Jesus, we're willing to trade that in order to get some influence in return. And Jesus never will call you to do the right thing the wrong way. Jesus will never call us as a church to do the right thing the wrong way. You cannot do the work of Jesus without doing it in the way of Jesus. And so we must reject that invitation to do the right thing the wrong way. I see that sometimes when I see it in the news. I see people advocating for positions that I agree with, but they do it with such anger and hatred that I can't align myself with it. Do you know what I'm talking about? They are fighting the right fight, but it is fueled by such distaste, disdain, and anger that I can't align myself fully with it. And so I just want to call you to remain true, not just to the things that Jesus has called us to, but to the ways that Jesus has showed us. Because the church will be under pressure, not just by morals, but by methods, too. And the third way the church is under pressure is by muzzles. Sometimes compromise in the church is simply this. It is the pressure to be silent when something wrong is happening in order to save you the pain that might come from it. It is the pressure to be silent when something wrong is going on in our world, and we are called not to speak against it because it will cause us discomfort if we stick up for those who are being pressured by it. Martin Niemöller was a famous pastor during World War II, and I will never, ever forget what he said. You've probably heard it before, but it's one of the most powerful and haunting quotes from the Second World War, and this is what he said. "When they came for the socialists, I did nothing because I was not a socialist. When they came for the trade unionists, I said nothing because I was not a trade unionist. When they came for the Jews, I said nothing because I was not a Jew. And when they came for me, there was no one left to say anything." If that doesn't hit, I don't know what will. Because we tend to shrink back and not say anything when we see wrong things happening in our society because we're like, okay, it's not affecting us yet. It's not making our life more difficult. And even our brothers and sisters are fighting fights that we let them fight because we don't quite agree with them in one of these areas. And all of a sudden, we do nothing and we trade our silence for peace. But the church is called to speak against injustice wherever it finds it. The church is called to speak the prophetic voice against those in power when it needs to be spoken. And so I pray that we as a church and you as individuals, you won't take that muzzle the way an animal is silenced and muzzled just because it offers you a little bit more peace, that we will be courageous enough to stand for what is good and right and stand against what is wrong and evil when it happens around us, even if it's not happening to us. Morals, methods, and muzzles. These are the three challenges that we face right now. And sure, it's not some incense being burned and three little words, but it is a challenge against us to compromise. And there will be voices in the church inviting you, calling you, ridiculing you for standing against it because it's not such a big deal. I am not saying that you need to make the world act like Christians because Jesus had never called us to do that. You don't need to make the rest of the world act like Christians, but hey, church, at least we should. At least we should. When my kids were younger, my favorite movie to watch of all the wild and crazy kids television that's out there, my favorite movie was the animated feature of Robin Hood. Have you ever seen it before? It's so good. It's so good. They're all animals retelling the Robin Hood story. And I love almost every character in that movie. But my favorite character above and beyond all of them is this character named Hiss. Do you know who I'm talking about? Hiss was this snake that used to sit beside Prince John. And all of the time he would pop up out of his little woven basket and he would whisper in Prince John's ear. And every time he would whisper, he would hiss his S's. Do you remember? He would say, "Yes, sire. Yes." And whenever these things would happen, he would speak these words and he would slowly poison Prince John into making a bad choice or moving in the wrong direction. And it was this hypnotic way of moving him into a dangerous place. And I want to caution you, church, right now that you need to listen for the hissing S's in culture around us. Do you hear me? There are people speaking to you. There are people encouraging compromise. There are people asking you to do what Jesus has told you not to. And we need to resist that, but you need to identify it first. And the way you identify it is listen for the hissing S's. Because that is what discernment is all about. It is the ability to hear not just what is being said, but who is saying it. And we need to watch out for the serpent who is tempting the church here and now to compromise the word and the call of God. So I'm going to call the worship team back up here.